And we are live on Facebook. Good evening, everyone. Dobry wieczór. This is Anna Wilczyńska from Salam Lab, and I am quite humbled, actually, and very happy to introduce my guest of tonight. And we're talking with Nicola Sutcliff, a linguist and a writer, author of the book Queens of the Kingdom, The Women of Saudi Arabia Speak. And tonight we're going to talk about the Polish translation of her book, which is Jestem Saudyjką, Świat, oczami kobiet z Arabii Saudyjskiej. And we're going to talk about, well, Saudi Arabia, women, and all the world around them. So Nicola, thank you very much for being here with us tonight. I'm very happy to meet you and to introduce you to our Salam Lab audience.
Thank you very much for having me. Dobry wieczór to everyone. Thank you for coming.
Before we're going to start with the questions about the book, about Saudi Arabia, about women, I would like to ask all of you to let us know if you can hear us correctly, if you can see us correctly, if at any point during this transmission you can see that there is something wrong with the sound or with the vision, just let us know. And Karol, who is taking care of technicalities tonight, he's going to help us figure it out. So please let us know if you can hear us and see us just right. And from the very beginning of this conversation, I would like to ask you to leave your comments, your questions in the comment section. If you have questions about the book, and let me remind you that Jestem Saudyjką, Świat, oczami kobiet z Arabii Saudyjskiej, and in English that's Queen of the Kingdom, the women of Saudi Arabia Speak. Here it is. That's the English version. There you go. Yeah, we're waiting for your questions. We are waiting for your comments for our great guest and author of the book. So yeah, at any point, we're reading all your comments. We're reading all your voices, and we're going to share them live during this conversation. And let me remind you that for the two people who would ask the most interesting questions, together with Nicola, we're going to choose those most interesting ones, and we're gonna send you the book, the Polish translation, the copy of the book. So yeah, stay with us till the end to find out if you'll get the book from us tonight. And I can already see that there are some people in the comment section. Very happy to see you and to see your comments. Nicole, one of our writers, says that she can hear us and see us just fine. Agnieszka also, we can see and hear you very well. Thank you very much for those comments. So now we can, I guess, confidently start knowing that everybody can hear us and see us just fine. Let me just remind you that this very meeting is sponsored by Prószynski and Publishing House, the publisher of the book Jestem Saudyjką by Nicola Sutcliff. But usually what we do on Salam Lab, we're just supported by you, but by our viewers, by our readers and listeners. So if you would like to support our mission, support reliable, good sources of information about diversity, about religious dialogue, go to our Polish Patreon website, which is patronite.pl/SalamLab. You can support us there. All right, I guess we have the introduction covered. I can see that people are joining. We're waiting for your comments and for your questions. But before we start with them, I have an honor and a pleasure to start with my questions tonight. So Nicola, I was really interested, and you uncovered some of that in the book as well. How did you actually end up in Saudi Arabia? This is not a very popular destination now that you can actually get a travel visa and go there. I mean, before COVID of it all. It was not a very popular destination for Europeans, for so-called Westerners to go to work. So what was your story? How did it happen that you went there, you stayed there for quite a while, and in the end you wrote a book about it?
Yes, well, I think I mentioned in the introduction that I had been a bit of a gypsy in my 20s, and I had moved around Europe a lot. And my father actually was getting quite worried about me, and he sat me down one day and said, Nicola, you really need to get a more stable job and stay in one place for a while. And so, I took his words seriously, and I came back to him a few months later and said, Papa, I found a job. It's a really good university position. It's well paid. And he was like, yes. And I said, it's in Saudi Arabia. And he went, oh.
Here we go again.
This was pretty much everyone's reaction when I said I was going to Saudi Arabia. But that's also part of the reason that I chose Saudi Arabia, actually, because by this point I said I'd already lived in quite a few places. And I'd already noticed that stereotypes normally weren't very accurate, and that wherever you went, people are normally just people, and we all have a lot more in common than we do apart. So I was reading all this media that kind of makes Saudi Arabia to be the pantomime villain of the world. And I thought, what's the real story? What is it really like? That, and the fact that, I considered myself a feminist, and the feminist press in the West is full of articles with opinions on how women in other parts of the world should live. There's a lot of opinion about hijab and different cultures. And I also thought, who am I to have an opinion about these things when I've never walked a mile in someone else's shoes, when I've never worn a veil or done any of those things. So I wanted to go and see for myself what this place was really like. And my intention was to stay for 6 months. And I ended up staying for 4 years, which should be enough to tell you that the horror stories were not true.
What were your first impressions after arriving to Saudi?
In the beginning, just kind of practical visual things. Some things were very different. Just the way men and women are separated in public places. And even the queue for McDonald's, there would be a men's line and a women's line, the women's line all in black and the men's line all in white. The fact that when I was arriving from the airport, my driver took me to get food, and I had to wait in the car while he went inside to get the food because there wasn't a women's section. So some things like that kind of took me aback a bit at the beginning. But as time went on, I realized that, so much of that was superficial, and that a lot of life was the same as it is elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. I was also wondering, because you probably went back to Saudi Arabia since you wrote the book, and it was published in 2018, so before some quite big changes. So there's a lot in the book about the ban on driving, which is now lifted. There's certain things that, especially political things, that changed a bit after the Khashoggi issue, and after Joe Biden stopped supporting military interventions of Saudi Arabia and Yemen. So there's so many changes since then that happened. Do you feel like if you would come back there today, would that still be the same place, the same country, or maybe with opening and giving touristic visas to everyone, and with COVID of it all and so on, is it going to be so much different, or do you feel it's still the same place that you visited, that you saw before moving on there?
Things are changing very fast. Yeah, the first version came out in 2019, so about 2 years ago now, and it was just after the driving ban was lifted. So editing this book was fun because there were always new stories coming out. And first I would go, yes, women can drive, or whatever the new step was, they can rent their own homes. And then I would go, and I have to rewrite that chapter. And I think that's something that people say a lot about Saudi Arabia, is that, Saudi Arabia is in the Middle Ages, Saudi Arabia is so backward, when actually the rate of change is quite phenomenal. When you think this country is less than 100 years old, and 50 years ago, the majority of the population were rural village dwellers or Bedouin. How far things are actually changing very fast, and yes, especially so in the last decade. And I've been back a couple of times on other research trips since I wrote the book, and I'm amazed just because I stayed in very close contact with my students from the university, and the stories they're telling me. They're saying, Miss Nicola, we're going to an open mic night at a cafe this evening with boys. The way women are dressing is changing, but at the same time, laws and these kind of regulations, they're much faster to change than the underlying culture. So I think what I've written in the book remains true about mostly, women's opinions and so forth. But yes, changes is coming fast.
And moving on to the main topic of the book, so the Saudi Arabian women, there's a couple of topics that you covered and a couple of questions that you asked to different heroines of the book. So you asked about driving, obviously, which was a big topic in Europe at the time. Mm-hmm. But you ask about also things that are a lot more important to those women, actually. So, for example, the idea of a mahram, so the male guardianship. Yeah. You ask about their education. You ask about, well, I would call that like their views on feminism, also, and on women's rights. And I gotta say, I was really surprised with the great diversity of opinions that you've collected in the book. There's like women that I've met thanks to you and through that book. Some of them were very conservative and like very stuck to the tradition, and some of them were, I would never say that they live in Saudi Arabia. Maybe somewhere in Paris or Berlin might be a lot more suitable if you think like stereotypically. And I was wondering, how did you get in touch with so many diverse women? Was it just a natural process that you've met them and you just pick the heroines that you wanted in the book, or did you maybe look for a specific person that's going to fit, I don't know, a description maybe?
So as I was, working in the university, and it's an all-women's university, the first women's university in Saudi Arabia, and I started talking more to women around there, and I felt so privileged to be hearing their stories and hearing how different it was to the stereotypes that I was reading in the media. And so I had this idea to start collecting some stories, but I didn't know if it would ever really be published. And I would go to events at the embassies because especially at that time, there were not a lot of leisure activities, cinemas, that kind of thing open. So we would go to events at the embassies. And there would be members of the Shura Council, a government body, speaking, or businesswomen. And so I summoned up the courage and asked them about this idea of writing a compilation of women's stories. And they just said yes. They said, yes, come to my house and we'll do an interview. And they, then connected me to other women. And so suddenly I found myself sitting in the living room of a princess or an activist or a member of parliament, somebody I'd read about in the newspaper, and they were answering all my questions. I was incredibly lucky. And actually, it was the women who I initially thought I would be speaking to, the less high-profile women, who were a lot more difficult to access. So, housewives and teachers and more kind of everyday professions. And those I had to get braver as I went along, because I was determined to have a good spread, because if you're just speaking to elite women, you're not getting a full picture. And also you're kind of telling the story that's been told before, because a lot of these women have spoken to the media in some way before. So I started going to my students' homes, meeting their families, approaching women selling food at markets, sitting next to people at the train station and asking them questions. But what was amazing is that I think in all those years, I only had 2 rejections. 2 people said no, and very politely. And otherwise, people like to talk about themselves. So I was treated with great hospitality, and I was very lucky to talk to quite a range of women. And I also tried to travel around the country as much as I could to make sure I wasn't just in Riyadh, because of course Saudi is more diverse than most people think.
And I was especially curious about actually 2 specific women that you have in a book. One of them is a huge name right now. A great activist. If you follow Salam Lab, even from like recent months, you've seen that we wrote about her so many times. Of course, I talk about Lujaina Al-Hatlul. So I was wondering, how did you get in touch with her? How did you meet her?
I wasn't looking to meet Lujaina. At that point in the process, I thought, I have enough high-profile women. And then one of the other women I was working with said, "Oh, you should go visit Lujaina in Dubai." And I thought I might as well. And I'm so glad I did, because she and her husband at the time were so warm and welcoming, and she's such an interesting character. And the media, of course, in Saudi Arabia paints a very negative picture of her, which is reflected in society in general about what people think of her. And just to meet her and see how warm and witty and determined and strong this woman is was really a privilege. And of course, we all celebrated in February when she was finally released. And I'm looking forward to her resuming her studies in Paris, where I am. So I might be able to see her again.
Yeah, hopefully soon she'll be able to leave the country, because as far as I'm informed, she might have some problems with that, right? And there's another woman that I would like to ask you about. You just said that you would ask and talk to people in random places, like on the food market or in the train station. And there was this one woman from Philippines, right at the end, the migrant. How did you get in touch with her? Because that's also, I would say, quite maybe a typical story in the Gulf. So a woman goes to work in the Gulf in Saudi Arabia to earn money for her family. But at least my experience is that migrants stay totally separately from the rest of society, and especially in the Gulf countries, you have to know exactly where to go to meet them and to have like freedom to talk with them and not to be stared at. I don't know, maybe that's another misconception that I have, and maybe my experience is isolated, but I was wondering, how did you meet this?
It was really hard. It was really hard. I spent, well, no, in the end, the Filipino lady, she worked at the university where I taught. But what I had originally wanted to speak to a domestic household worker, and I spent about a year, and I didn't manage it. It's very difficult because you only meet them in the context of them being with their boss. They don't always have phones or aren't willing to share their numbers. But I really wanted to have someone from that community there, because that, I'm really against stereotyping of Saudi Arabia. But that was the one part of Saudi culture I found really hard to deal with, was the sometimes the treatment of domestic workers. So I met her. She worked on my floor in the university, and I was able to convince her, if I didn't use her real name, to come and talk to me. And through that, I was able to get a bit more of a look into such a hidden. I think that would be an interesting book as well, to be honest, just the lives of non-Saudis, or in the Gulf in general, those domestic workers. And
so maybe that's an idea for another book.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, but it's also, when I say that, it's certainly not true that all household staff are treated badly. also been in houses where they're really like hugged and kissed by the family, and they're all singing together. But because there's so little control and protection over that particular area of life, then when they are treated badly, it's very difficult to deal with. And I would sometimes be surprised to be speaking with a lovely Saudi friend and see them turn around and speak completely differently to the household staff.
Of course, I have more questions, but maybe I will find a second to ask them later, because I see in the comment section that we have quite a range of comments and questions. There's people saying hi, saying Natalia, nice to see you both, greeting from Polish seaside. Hi Natalia, thanks for being with us. Hello everyone from Mirka. Hello and greetings for you, Nicola, from Patio as well. And we have some great questions here. Maybe speaking about how you got in touch with the heroines of your book, we're gonna ask a question from Małgorzata. Is it possible to talk about ruling family openly? In the book, you've covered one princess, a member of the ruling family and royal family of Saudi Arabia. She was not talking about politics, well, for other reasons, I guess, but was it possible for you to talk openly about the ruling family, and for your heroes and heroines to do so as well?
Yeah, I mean, I consciously did not make this a political book because I sort of didn't want it to get overshadowed by that. So you mean like in society, can people openly criticize leaders, things like that?
Yes.
There's a very paternal relationship, with the ruling family. People will not often speak ill of the royal family, especially in public. And you will find in strange places sometimes, in supermarkets and schools and things, there are big portraits of king, crown prince, and so on. Sometimes there will be a comment about a bit of corruption, maybe, but in general, there's an enormous amount of respect for the royal family. And yes, I mean, it's true. It's difficult to be openly critical. I think we're aware of that by how those who have been critical have sometimes been treated. But I would say in general that there seemed to be kind of a genuine respect for the royal family, was quite widespread.
And in sort of private conversations, in like closed walls, closed rooms with just like trusted people, would any political conversations, would they happen at all, or that was kind of a avoided topic among the people?
Only really those who had a political stake. Maybe those working with the government or against the government, we would have those kinds of conversations. It didn't really come up. There's a real kind of acceptance of that's the way things are in that country. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Małgorzata, who asked that question, if you have any following questions, we're waiting for them, but we have so many more. A question from Natalia, who also writes for us for Salamnot. So hi, Natalia, thank you for your question. As you said, Nicola, changes are happening very fast. And Natalia is asking, do you have any predictions? What will change next? What would be the next thing? What will surprise us in 2021 or 2022? Do you have any predictions?
That's a good question. There are things that you won't maybe hear about very publicly, but I know that the guardianship the wilaya is gradually being disassembled. I think the reason you don't hear about it so much in the media is that there was never really one big law. The guardianship was never one law. it was a cultural practice that was sustained by a lot of small regulations written by different civil servants all over the country. And so, but those are gradually being withdrawn. And so every now and then I discover that now a woman, can divorce her husband, or a woman can rent her home, or she's collecting her passport. And so I think in the next couple of years, there will be no, there's hardly anything now. There'll be no more legal remnants of guardianship. Whether it continues to exist culturally, I think that will take a bit more time. What else? You're going to see more cultural things happening. We're already seeing pop concerts and things like that. And I think you're going to see women start to be appointed to more prominent ministry positions.
That would be actually great to see. And I feel like we have more and more Saudi women in sport. I remember from a couple of years before, I guess that was a woman of mixed Saudi and American origin. She was one of the first runners to compete in the international competition. I'm not sure, that might have been Olympics. And she was competing in one of the sprint competitions. And she was like last and long after all the other women. They were long at the finish line, and she just arrived to the finish line. But she actually got the biggest applause because everybody knew that she was one of the first Saudi women there competing for her country, representing her country. So hopefully we're going to see some more great surprises like that, like women represented in every sphere of politics, of economics, of sports, of culture. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, and that's really significant because young women growing up now are seeing that as something normal. And that makes a big difference to their ambitions.
So yeah, big fingers crossed for those women, those girls. And thank you, Natalia, for your questions about predictions.
Can I also make one more prediction?
Sure.
There's going to be a lessening of segregation, I would say. That's already becoming less so. And I think there'll still be men only and female only spaces, but I think there will be more shared spaces. Part of the reason that Saudi Arabia has been able to maintain this segregation in every area of life more than any other country has achieved that is wealth that they have, that you can't keep one half of the populace shut away forever when the country is trying to develop in different ways. So I think you'll start to see images of more mixing going on.
Yeah, so hopefully when the pandemic is over and people will be able to travel again, maybe some of you would like to go and visit and see that change as well. Before I ask your next questions, and I can see that there is more and more coming. Thank you very much for those. We're still waiting for them. So if you have questions about Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabian women, we are waiting for them here in the comments section. I would like to remind you that tonight we're talking with Nicola Sutcliff, linguist and writer, author of the book Queens of the Kingdom, The Women of Saudi Arabia Speak. And we're talking tonight because there is a Polish translation published of that book, and that's Jestem Saudyjką, Świat, oczami, kobiet z Arabii Saudyjskiej. And tonight you can win your own copy of the book. We're going to give away 2 copies of the Polish translation. So we're waiting for your interesting questions to our guest tonight, Nicola Sutcliff. We're going to talk for around half an hour more, so we're waiting and we're interested in your questions, in your comments. And we have a question from Carolina. Carolina writes, "Hi, greetings from Gdynia," so that's in the northern Poland by the sea. "I haven't read the book yet, so my question might be not in the topic, but I'm wondering where the Saudi Arabia is heading after the oil will end. So if the oil ends, it will end eventually. What will they do? Is the country investing in political and intellectual elites, development of science, other industries, or services? It looks like they are living only like there is no tomorrow. Do you have any info about that?
Certainly been the case for quite some time. And the oil wealth has allowed Saudi, as I said, to maintain segregation and to be very insular, and not to worry too much about what the rest of the world thinks. But yes, there is now a looking forward, certainly, to the future and what that will bring. I think that's been a big point of concern for MBS, as he's known over there, Mohammed bin Salman. I think it's the impetus behind the push for tourism, that visas are opening up. They're hoping to make money that way, behind bringing more women into the workplace. Definitely more trying to get more cultural activity going, and not just importing that as well. Definitely, yes, there is a transition happening. There is starting to be a recognition that this cannot continue indefinitely.
And there's also one big industry apart of like regular tourism. Saudi Arabia has Mecca and Medina, so the so-called religious tourism is going to go on, and that's going to bring like quite a portion of a budget to the Saudi government. I mean, now, well, this year it might be a little bit better, but last year, because of the COVID, there was just 1,000 people during their Hajj, doing their Muslim obligation of pilgrimage to Mecca. But that's probably going to come back. Maybe not this year yet, but next year. So that's also a interesting thing to look up if that's still going to be a big portion of the budget. Yeah, but the tourism, definitely, not only the religious one, but like generally, that's going to be.
Yeah, even here in Paris, I started to see like on the sides of buses, like come to Al Ula in Saudi Arabia, and I'm thinking, wow, they're going to have a lot of people coming. I think they're seeing a lot of tour guides being trained at the moment, female tour guides as well. So there's a renewed pride in heritage, which is also interesting to see, because places like Al Ula, which is like a sister city of Petra in Jordan, and an amazing sight, hundreds of these huge tombs in the middle of the desert, and no one there, because there was such a taboo about going there, that it was not permitted religiously, because it was pre-Islamic, and other sites that have been massively neglected for similar reasons. And now, because of the potential of tourism, these places are being cared for again, and other historical sites are being restored. I think sometimes when places develop so fast, there's a real obsession with the shiny and the new. And I'd be looking at the historic buildings in Jeddah or visiting an old mud town and saying, "This is incredible." And my Saudi friends would be saying, "My grandma used to live there." And because things have changed so fast, that they didn't appreciate that huge jump, and that all this would be lost. So yes, now with the push for tourism, that is being acknowledged, and some of that is being saved.
And speaking about this big jump you just said about, I hope this is not going to be a big spoiler, but my absolute favorite heroine of the book is the first woman. So this 100-year-old lady who remembers Saudi Arabia before Saudi Arabia. So a woman who is older than the state itself, like starting the book from this woman and from her perspective, her distance to all the years that she's lived there. That was really, really incredible beginning. And I hope hearing this story now is gonna encourage you to get the book and to read it, because even the first chapter is really engaging and really informative.
She was my favorite too. Mama Muna. And she was an accident, actually. I went to visit this town outside of Riyadh to speak to someone else, and there was a big family picnic, and there was this very old lady, but who was being entertaining in the corner, you know, and I said, her, I need to speak to her. And they arranged that for me. And no, that was incredible, because she grew up in a mud house in a tiny village, which is now a big city, and the change she's seen is phenomenal. And what was really interesting about doing her interview is that as she was speaking, other members of the family all started gathering around. And not only were they interpreting for me, they were listening quite carefully, and they said, we've never heard these stories. Because often we don't think to ask the older members of our family or that we should. So that was quite eye-opening for them as well. And the number of, I don't know, at one point we were talking about the number of children she had lost, because the infant mortality rate was extremely high in those days, unfortunately. And she got a bit emotional, of course, and she went to lie down for a bit, and I apologized to her granddaughter and said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset her. I just wanted to understand what her life has been like. And then a few minutes later, she came and she was tugging at my sleeve, and she said, you're tired? And I said, no. And she's like, more story. Because she wanted to share these stories that she'd never told before.
Wonderful. That was really a great story in the book. And thank you very much, Carolina, for the question about what's going to happen after the oil ends. Let's see more. Another Małgorzata is asking, I was surprised that non-Muslim women don't have to wear abayas anymore. Is there a specific dress code for non-Muslim women in Saudi Arabia?
This, again, is something that has changed a lot in the last few years. When I was there, an abaya was obligatory for all women. Hijab or tarha was obligatory for entering any government building, like the university where I worked. And also, I mean, I often just wore it anyway to fit it in as a sign of respect. I also, the first few months, I wore niqab as well, although that wasn't obligatory. Now, it happened a few years ago that when he was giving an interview in America, actually, Mohammed bin Salman said that a woman can wear anything that is modest. We don't have any laws. And it's true, you know, because Saudi law is a slippery thing, because Saudi doesn't actually have a coded law. It's interpretations of the Quran and supplemented with state regulations. So he made it clear, actually, that this is not law. And then women in the past couple of years have started to go out without wearing the abaya, but wearing modest clothing. So that would mean, I would wear a skirt to my ankles or very loose-fitting trousers and something loose-fitting on top as well. As far as I'm aware, that there isn't a different law for Saudi women and for Western women. It's more likely that Western women might feel freer or to not wear it, or simply not want to wear the abaya, whereas Saudi women would rather stay with that tradition. And abayas are a big fashion thing, by the way, over there. I turned up in this thing that I'd bought off of Amazon, and everyone was horrified. I had this grandma abaya on. By the time I left, I had a whole rack. I had velvet, I had shoulder spikes, I had everything. And I mean, I think the women who are still wearing abayas now are more likely to go for colors and for lace and for details. But yeah, now you can, as long as it's modest, an abaya is no longer necessary.
And you said that you decided to wear niqab for a while. Why is that?
I wanted to know what that was like. Again, as I said at the beginning, I think we're very quick to make judgments when we've never experienced things for ourselves. And I still would towards the end in certain more conservative areas. So I just wanted to know what that was like. I find that it's quite difficult as a Western woman culturally, because my instinct in a shop is when I pay for something is to smile and say thank you. And I would find myself lifting my niqab to talk to the guy. I have to remember not to maintain the eye contact. Yes, so that's why I wore it. I decided later on not to, because I felt it impacted my communication, not just with men, but with other women. So most of the time I didn't cover.
But now that we're all wearing masks, you're pretty much used to it. Trying niqab before, so that's a good training.
There's been such a storm on social media among Saudi women making fun of Saudi men, actually, because once masks became obligatory, Saudi men started suddenly citing articles about how it would affect their oxygen intake, and how it wasn't comfortable, and how, you know, it was their right, their freedom. And and until they had always been telling Saudi women that it was very good for their skin to wear niqab, and you know, it freed them from so many things. And yeah, there were a lot of cartoons going around.
Oh, great. Speaking about women, we have a question from Agnieszka. What do you think about, well, speaking about men, we have a question from Agnieszka. What do you think about men in Saudi Arabia? Are they scared of women growing in power right now?
What a question. What do I think about men? Well, are they scared? I mean, there's such a variety of men, like there's such a variety of humans everywhere. I think what has really affected women's lives until now, like how free a woman is in Saudi Arabia, has always depended on the man who was her guardian. And so you meet women who have great lives because they have a supportive husband or father, but the system was set up as such that if a husband was abusive or restrictive, there was very little that a woman could do. Now, it also depends on men's experiences. Men who have lived abroad and the younger generation of men, I see being extremely supportive of all these changes that are happening for women. Some men even a bit relieved, actually, that all the responsibility that has fallen on them traditionally in terms of finances and so on may start to be shared. And then, yes, of course, you get more conservative men who are afraid of change, who try to stick an obstacle in the path. But as Dr. Aisha says, another one of the interviewees, you cannot stop the ball from rolling. You cannot stop the wheel of change. It will keep happening.
So we're still waiting for your questions about women, but if you wanted to ask about men as well in Saudi Arabia, feel free to do so. We have also a question and a comment from Gosha. Where do you think this openness to share their stories came from? Speaking about women from Saudi Arabia, I feel that sometimes women from the Western world are often afraid to tell their stories to strangers. So I find it quite intriguing that it was in the reverse. It was the other way around in Saudi Arabia.
Firstly, I have to say people were incredibly welcoming to outsiders in Saudi Arabia. I would have groups of teenage girls come up to me in the mall and giggling and pushing forward the person who spoke best English to say, "Welcome to my country." People are, and I mean, there's the hospitality of the region is great. So people are very quick. If you're brave enough to make contact, the people are quick to invite you into their homes. The openness, I think, perhaps came from the fact, as I said, people like to talk about themselves, and I was asking them questions that perhaps people hadn't asked them before. In many houses, I was the first Westerner who'd been to their homes. So there was a sense of curiosity, a sense of wanting to share what their culture was about with an outsider. maybe not having been asked questions before about their hopes and dreams, which actually they sometimes found difficult to articulate, because when you're a mom of a huge household, maybe no one's really stopped to ask you that before. Also, actually, the fact that I was an outsider might have helped. The Saudi Arabia is a very private country. Most of the houses have very high walls around, and it's crossed by very strong tribal links, and reputation is extremely important. And I was safe in a way, in that I wasn't going to spread rumors in other parts of society, that I was kind of an alien in some ways. So they felt more willing to tell me a secret.
Thank you for answering. That's actually that's very interesting. That maybe they didn't feel threatened in any way to share their stories and their dreams with you. That's actually great. And thank you very much, Gusha, for the question. Yeah, we have a comment from Adam, one of the first men in our discussion. Great. He's very happy that we spoke about the Filipino woman working in Saudi Arabia. It's also a very interesting topic for further investigation. Also, when it comes to next book, I guess I would be also very eager to write to read more about that. And we have a question from Kat. Do women play a part in NEOM? So this huge new investment in Saudi Arabia's desert. What's the situation of female professionals in Saudi Arabia in science, in engineering, in technology? So, Kat, I'm sure you're gonna meet a lot of great specialists in the book, but I'm really wondering what you, Nicola, would like to say about that. Women in NEOM and professionals.
So, female professionals and in sciences, yes. That when I arrived, it was a bit of a problem for young women to have access to certain courses. The university that I taught in, the original departments were things like kindergarten and home economics and what were considered linguistics, what were considered traditionally feminine subjects. And a lot of the sciences, a lot of technology was only taught at the men's universities. And in the last 5 or 6 years, that started to change. It's been changing first in the private universities, where perhaps they will allow, I know some girls who wanted to study engineering, for example, and they would study with the men, but they would study from a balcony. So they would be watching the same classes, but not sitting with the guys. Or when, some subjects started coming into the girls' universities, they would be taught by a one-way video link, so they could see the male professor if there wasn't a female professor in the subject available. But the professor couldn't see them. When I have spoken to people in academia about this, they insist that it's a matter of supply and demand, that there hasn't been enough demand for girls doing these subjects yet for these things to open. I think it's been a bit of both going on. Of course, from the beginning, these things just weren't considered suitable for women. And that's one of the stories in the book, actually, is about a girl who wanted to be an engineer and how she works on cars, and she says that she would have to ask her father, and to work on her project, she would have to ask her father and her brother what it feels like, to stall and things like this. Because although she was designing a car, she had never had that experience herself. And you have all these kinds of, odd circumstances where things don't quite line up. Now, I think the last field that was still closed to women was in the petroleum studies. I believe that has recently opened up to women as well. So I don't think there are any subjects anymore that are forbidden to women. It's a matter of, can families afford to send their daughters to private universities where these things are taught, and how quickly they are taken on by public universities.
Yeah, also this year there was this news that Saudi Arabia is opening all the army units to women as well. And there was a lot of questions like, how are they going to do that if the country is so divided? Like, are they going to have separate, like every single unit separate for men and women, and how the uniforms are going to look like? I'm really interested. I know that this year is going to be the first one when they actually going to recruit women. So we're going to see in a couple of years how it's going to turn out when they graduate and they become actual soldiers. I'm also wondering if they're going to be sent to fight, if they go, I mean, God forbid, to Yemen or any other place. Yeah, that's a big surprise how that's going to turn out.
Yeah, I'm not sure that women are going to be on the front lines for a few more years. I think there's a big conflict there culturally as well, with the idea that's very deep rooted in Saudi Arabia of the protection of women and women as mothers, and that kind of role in the family. I think that would really jar to have them on the front line. But yes, we've seen already those images of them acting as security guards in Mecca, for example. Certainly some women really want to do it. That's another woman in the book, the security guard who had a gun and she was ready to be a police officer. But I would imagine they'd be more involved initially with internal security.
Still great questions coming to us. That might be, sorry guys, but that might be last moment to ask your questions. We have still a lot to answer. I'm very sorry already if we're not gonna cover all of them, but we'll do our best to cover at least a few in those last few minutes. So there is interesting question from Adam, one that I also wanted to ask myself. So Adam asks, he says, actually, I unfortunately haven't read the book yet, so I don't know if this topic is covered in the text or not, but I highly recommend that, Adam, you're gonna love it. But Nicola, have you met a woman from Shia minority, which is heavily discriminated in Saudi Arabia?
I have. And do I have her book here? There's a good biography of a woman from that group called In the Shadow of Her Voice. I know the author of that. I don't have any Shia women in my book. That was a big failing on my part. I'm sorry, Adam. But yeah, no, I'm afraid that wasn't really an area that I specialized in. It's being more in Riyadh, and that being more in the Al-Khobar region, most of the Shia community.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that answer. I guess it would also, it might be very difficult because you would actually have to like ask each woman, so are you Shia by any chance? That would be very uncomfortable. Yeah, I mean, unless
that was kind of a taboo question. And people don't necessarily, if they are Shia, don't always are very forthcoming about that fact.
So moving on to a question from Julia. Julia says, good evening, greetings from Krakow, the city in Poland. Hi, Julia. Did you worry about falling into disfavor with the government once having decided to publish the book? Yeah, Julia still haven't read the book, but she's very interesting if it was risky for you as an author to publish it.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was risky to research it in some respects. Those documents were certainly well hidden when I was traveling in and out of the country. Because just things like photography and any journalistic pursuit you're supposed to have a license for, which would obviously massively restrict my work. When it came to the publishing, there were things I was nervous about, of course. but I took strength from the other women who were participating in this book. I thought, in the end, I'm going back to Europe. These women have put their names in this book, and I said, "Are you sure you want to say all of this?" And they said yes. And I thought, if they have the courage to do that, I mean, of course I'm going to be brave enough to put my name on it too. I don't think it's a very controversial book in some ways anyway. I mean, I tried not to be sensationalist. I think there's enough, enough material, enough newspaper columns out there going through all those negative tropes about Saudi Arabia. I knew that I wanted to focus on the stories of women and their lived experiences. So when publishers come back and say, "Can't you tell us a bit more about government and about politics and about men's role in this?" I would say, that's another book. Thank you very much. Because in order to get this one out, without problems, I had to focus on what I wanted it to be about.
And maybe at this point, it is really worth to mention that I understand that some of the women, they are in the book by like pseudonyms or different names, and that's for all the good reasons. But there are some real names here for sure, and there are some great pictures, great images. Like with every heroine, you can actually see either like her actual face or her face covered with niqab, but you get like a full picture, not only her opinions, her voice, but you can imagine what she looks like and what goes through her head, because those pictures, those images are actually quite stunning. I don't know if you can see, if our viewers and listeners can see them, but yeah, once you get your copy of the Polish translation, you'll definitely see all the women in the book. So that's a great point of the book as well.
I think, when we were talking about if I was nervous about it, I would say the publishers were more nervous than I was with the initial print, because they had only seen Saudi through the media, what I had known of it before I went. And so they were the ones who wanted to cut certain things and wanted more anonymity, although the women themselves really wanted to use their names. And yes, sorry, yes, the publishing house got very nervous.
And I guess I'm gonna ask the last question of tonight. We have some more. I'm sorry, we're not gonna cover all of them, but there is a question from Beata, quite interesting. Which problems or topics were difficult for you and for them, for the women, to understand? When did you feel far away and close to them? Was there any specific topics that made you feel really far away from them or really close to them? Do you remember any specific topics that were like really hard taboos apart from Shia-Sunni relationships? And Beata says, thank you very much for the conversation, and greetings from Ankara, Turkey. So we're saying hi to Ankara as well. Thank you for the question, Beata.
So topics that were difficult for them to talk about?
Yes, ones that they really felt difficult to talk about, but also, do you have any topics that make you feel really close to them, that were really like a source of a deep connection?
Okay. Depending on a woman's status and age, I mean, some of the more personal questions about relationships were harder for them to go into. Some of the questions were more difficult conceptually, because I'm coming from quite a different worldview. And, if someone came here to you in the West and asked you, how do you feel about being a woman here? It's kind of abstract for you to be able to explain. So yes, sometimes the questions were difficult. Sometimes things like feminism. Sometimes the duality was difficult to navigate. For example, you'd have often a woman telling me that women are exactly the same as men, women are better than men, women should be allowed to do all the things that men can do. And then at the end, I would ask, what would happen if a woman were king or a woman were the president? And then we'd go, no, because women are too emotional. But they were unable to see this duality themselves, you know? Or sometimes some of the excuses that were made for certain things, like driving, you know, and I would be told, but it's because then we'd have too many cars on the road. And even though I was saying, but you're still on the road, you're just with the driver. And then it was interesting that once this became legal, some of them decided actually it would be okay for women to drive, and they've been having lessons since. But it's how they had to justify certain things in order for it not to get to them, I guess. Feeling close? Well, I mean, one of the lovely things about Saudi is, I mean, segregation has its challenges, but there's a silver lining to everything, I guess. And one thing is that there's a real sense of sisterhood. You know, we talked about that openness of them wanting to share their stories, because probably we weren't in the presence of men, and that kind of sharing, and that kind. They also, you know, had completely different perspectives on things that maybe made me think a bit when they were saying how awful it must be to be a woman in the West, because not only do you have to give birth to the child and look after the child and you know, help look after the house, but then you're supposed to pay the bills and the school fees. This is not women's rights. Yeah, so it was interesting on both sides.
If you want to learn more about how Saudi Arabian women view us, European women, there is also a lot in the book about that, and you might really be surprised.
It's going both ways.
Yeah, they work both ways. Thank you very much for this question, Beata, and thank you, all of you watching and listening to us tonight, to our conversation, for all the great questions and comments that you sent during this last hour. Let me remind you that my guest tonight was Nicola Sutcliff, a linguist and writer, author of Queens of the Kingdom, Women of Saudi Arabia Speak, and now we have that great book also published in Polish, and that's Jestem Saudyjką, Świat, oczami, kobiet z Arabii Saudyjskiej, published by Prószynski Publishing House. But before we finish, we have our little giveaway and our little competition to settle. Nicola, do you have any ideas? Which questions would you like to award 2 books to? Any questions that
who asked the question about what I predict will change in the next couple of years?
Let me see. That's Natalia. Okay, Natalia. I see that. Great. Any other question that you really liked?
And maybe that last one.
That one from, let me see, Beata. A question about topics that were taboos and the ones that felt really like made you feel close or far away from Saudi women. Great. So we have our 2 winners, 2 ladies winners, which is great and quite in line with the theme of our tonight's conversation. Nicola, thank you very much for being here with us tonight. And thank you very much for a great book that we can now read in Polish. Yeah, and we're looking for some more to come once you write another one. We're waiting for Polish translation as well.
There is a second one. We hope it will be published soon. Thank you very much. If anyone has any other questions that I didn't get around to, feel free to go to the Queens of the Kingdom Facebook page, and I'll be happy to discuss further with people there. And thank you very much for sitting with us this evening.
Have a great evening, you guys. Let me just remind you that we see each other every Monday at 8 p.m. Polish time. And next week, we're going to have our Muslim Muslim circle, we're going to talk about Islam. This is every second Monday of the month that we talk about basic rules of Islam. We try to sort of demystify the religion, see similarities, see difficulties, so that we understand each other better. We build bridges, not walls, between religions. And our topic for next week is Sharia. So we're going to talk Islamic law with Tomasz Pietrzak, who is a specialist in Muslim law. He's specialist in Quran. We had him as a guest before. He spoke about Quran in one of the conversations that we had, I would say, a couple of months ago. So yeah, stay tuned for the next conversation next week. We're going to talk about Sharia. You can send us your questions, your comments about that as well. We're going to ask those to our expert next week. And next week, we're going to talk in Polish. So yeah, so be ready for that. Nicola, thank you very much again for the meeting tonight. Remember to get your copy of Jestem Saudyjką, which is a Polish translation from Queens of the Kingdom, the Women of Saudi Arabia Speak. Nicola, thank you very, very much for the conversation, and good night to all of our viewers and listeners.
My pleasure. Good night.
Good night.